Hello and welcome to the American Made First podcast, episode number 5. Our guest today is Michelle Knox of Wind Solar USA, windsolar.usa.com, out of Springfield, Illinois. Michelle, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking time to tell me what you do there in Illinois. So without further
Thank you
ado,
for inviting me.
yes.
Happy to be here, Darren.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a talk yesterday. I'm fascinated with your history. So tell me where you came from, what are your roots, and how did you get into the solar business?
Okay, well, my background is in business management, business administration. And fresh out of college, I worked for an insurance agency and managed a department for about 10 years. And at that point, then I was like, well, am I really making a difference in the world? And I didn't really feel like I was. I guess I was saving people on their premiums and making sure they were accurately covered. But I was like, meh. So I then decided that I wanted to pivot. So I quit that job and I went to school to be a Montessori teacher. And I was a Montessori teacher for 10 years. I was fortunate enough to be able to have my daughter with me every day from the time she was 0 to 12.
Wow.
So that was wonderful. And then towards the end of that 10 years, I had a question posed to me by a friend who was from Colorado. And he said, I wonder if someone could take out a loan, buy a solar system, and then use the savings each month from that system to be able to pay that loan back, pay it off, and have free energy from the sun at the end. And this happened to be in a summer, and I was like, wow, I wonder that too. So I took that summer and I researched, and I found that I thought that could happen. Payback would be about 20 years, but products are warranted for 25. So I was like, 5 years of free energy from the sun. What else can we buy that, pays for itself and then pays us to keep it? Couldn't think of anything. So I endeavored to begin the business. I trained for 3.5 years through the Midwest Renewable Energy Association in Custer, Wisconsin. At the time, there were only 2 renewable training facilities in the whole United States. One was in Colorado, one was in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, logistically, with me being in Illinois, was a better fit. So I used vacation days and time to travel. I was working as a development director for a mission school on the east side of Springfield at that point. I used my vacation days and time off to be able to travel and complete my training. I then resigned from that job, went full-time November of 2011, worked on my own through 2015, hired an intern for a summer, who I then hired when he graduated from, by that time, a college program for renewables here in Illinois. He was with me for about a year, decided that after he had a bachelor's degree in renewables that maybe that wasn't his forte, that he wanted to be a firefighter. So he went back to school to do that. In the meantime, I had hired an office manager who is still with me today. She's in her 10th year. We got an office downtown Springfield, and here I am.
Wow. Now, backpedal just a little bit. Explain what's the difference between a regular school teacher and a Montessori school teacher.
Okay. Well, with Montessori, the philosophy is follow the child. And so what you're doing in Montessori is you're basically observing the child. You're giving lessons either on an individual basis, in a small group basis, or even in a large group basis to the entire classroom. And once the student has had a lesson, then they are free to repeat that work independently until they gain mastery. And then once they've gained mastery, we give them another lesson. And so really the job of a Montessori teacher is to be a trained, astute observer and to know each child, to know what they need, to direct them if necessary, to be more of a directress is the way I like to look at it. And then to make sure that we keep them moving on in the right direction.
I think Scripture talks about training up a child in the way they should go. And my understanding of the root of that is train up a child in the way that is perfectly fitted to their personalities. It sounds like
That's
kind of what they're
exactly right.
doing. Interesting. Now, when you made the jump into solar and went on your own, that's scary to a lot of people. A lot of people would love to have the guts to do that, but that's scary. Tell me about that transition. What were your thoughts? What were your challenges? How did you get that going?
Well, I live in a village of 239 people, and so when I said I was going to start a solar energy business, people said, SLAR? What's SLAR? I said, no, solar. No one even knew what it was, and they were like, well, what does that look like? So I had done a lot of research I had little books of all kinds of different facets that I felt like I could pursue. And my attorney, who's still my attorney, and also a gentleman at the Small Business Development Center, I sought out assistance from them as well. And they both have since told me that they pretty much thought I was crazy at the time, but I proved them wrong. So it's a good story. But I had researched and developed and saw different facets that I thought I could pursue. Took the training. I trained simultaneously on wind, solar photovoltaics, which is solar for the generation of electricity, solar thermal, which is solar for the generation of heat, so that I could be versed in all three renewable technologies, because back in 2008, we weren't really sure how renewables were going to go. I, in fact, thought I would probably be concentrating more time on wind, because at the time everybody thought wind was kind of sexy. And so I'm glad that I did all three, because as it turned out, the price of solar came down significantly. The cost of wind stayed about the same. And then incentives in our state and also federally in terms of the tax credit became available for the technologies. And so it ended up being that solar was the low-hanging fruit in terms of being able to fit most people's profiles of where they live, easy to install, easy to permit, that kind of thing. So it ended up that has been my focus. I've done a couple of wind projects. I'm glad I did. It was great for the experience, but solar photovoltaics is really where my focus has been throughout pretty much my whole business operation.
Okay. And you serve the entire state of Illinois. Is that your home ground?
Yeah, I have done projects across the entire state, all the way from northern Illinois down to Cairo, which is in almost the southernmost point. And I primarily focus, though, now on central and southern Illinois. Just logistically, it makes sense if I have to travel, meet with an authority having jurisdiction, things like that. It was difficult to go up north. And also, the further north that I went, permitting was more difficult. It was a different utility territory that I wasn't as familiar with as the one in my own backyard. And so that's primarily been my focus, anywhere from about Peoria, Bloomington, down to Cairo.
Okay. Now, more and more people are becoming familiar with solar. Pretty much everyone knows what solar is now, but a lot of people don't know how that works. What would you say to the average homeowner that's considering solar? Educate them, let them know how it works, what the possibilities are.
Yeah. So, for residential, generally you're doing either a roof mount, which we can do pitched asphalt shingled roofs, pitched metal roofs, or a ground mount if you have the appropriate land space. So once we've determined, what is the preferred mounting method for a customer, we start by gathering 12 months of power bills, and then that allows us to do what is called system sizing. So there's a formula that we use in the industry to be able to what size system a customer needs in a perfect world. When I say perfect world, that would assume that we have 180 degree azimuth, we're facing due south, we have no shading, and in central Illinois we're at about a 32 degree tilt angle. So we don't always get those perfect world conditions, but when we do the sizing, it gives us a good place to start when we move to the next phase for the prospect, which is design. So once we know what size they need, then we look at the resource space that they have available, and we have now tools that we're able to use. When I first started, it was Michelle was the tool, getting on the roof, walking around, measuring everything, making sure that it fit. Now we have software programs that allow that to help it happen, where we can project the actual module that we're using onto the ground space or the roof space and be able to provide an aerial projection showing the customer what their arrays will look like.
Okay.
We call them arrays. That's a grouping of modules that's put together into so like we might have an array on a south slope, we might have another array on a west slope, and we call them modules, not panels. That's the correct terminology, because again, they're modules that are built together to create an array.
Right.
So just so we're forming the thing. So once we've done that, we then move to doing a cost model that's going to show the performance of the system. And then that also provides the economics in terms of the incentives. And then we do a presentation. As far as how solar works, so what the modules do is they collect the energy from the sun. They produce what's called DC power, or direct current. That's in Europe, that's what they use. In the United States, we use AC, or alternating current. We had to be different. And so accordingly, that DC power from the modules has to then flow through an inverter to convert it to AC. And then that AC power is fed into generally either the customer's main service panel or the utility meter outside. And so the loads are first, any loads that are present are served by the solar first. If there's anything left over, that overproduction feeds back through a net meter onto the utility grid. And really the next neighbor over that needs it, electricity follows the path of least resistance. So the next neighbor that needs it will then pull it down and use it. So it's a very effective means of distribution and neighbors being able to feed neighbors in a local network. And so then you get into different utility policies and how that overproduction is treated. It used to be banked at full retail, which meant if you overproduced during the day, they banked those kilowatt hours, similar to how we used to bank cell phone minutes, if you can recall that. I know you and I can, but
Yes.
when we talk to younger audiences, they're like, so you bank those kilowatt hours, and then at night or at a time of a lesser resource, you would pull from that bank and feed your load first before you pay for anything from the utility.
Now, has that changed?
That's changed. That was called retail net metering. So that's what was generally originally done when solar was new. In the state of Illinois, our investor-owned utilities changed from that policy effective January 1 of 2025. So the way it works now is that anything that you use behind the meter, we call it, so when it's feeding your loads first, it's still a full retail offset. Anything you feed back is based on the market price, and they set it stays level for 1 year, and they publish what that price is going to be each year. It's called the price to compare. It's presently about 7 cents. It's about half of what the retail rate is. And so you're still banking the energy portion of your kilowatt hour, not the full retail amount, which is about 7 cents.
Okay. So you're getting something for it. Whoever owns the network is going to get some benefit from it as well.
Well, there's some benefit to the utility, yeah, in that the overproduction that's coming back, the energy you're putting on the wire, is supposed to be like proportionate to what their cost is to procure energy out on the open market.
Okay.
And so it's a fair exchange. It was originally set up at retail so that we could grow renewables quickly in the state, and then once we got to a certain level to kind of dial it back so that the grid can catch up and be able to accommodate the higher percentage of renewables coming onto the grid system versus traditional methods through the fossil fuels.
Okay. Now, I know I've talked to people that say, oh, I want to get a solar system so I don't have to pay anything. My electricity will be a free. How realistic is that?
Well, with retail net metering, that was realistic, other than you always have to pay the customer charge or facility charge, and that's just the charge for being connected to the grid, having the grid at your service. And in the investor-owned utility territories in Illinois, that fee is about $15 a month, so very minimal. When you move into municipal and rural electric cooperative territories, because they don't have the same volume of customers in the, per mile, say, their costs are larger. So you could pay anywhere from, in cooperative territories, $39, $49, $50, $60 before you even pull a single kilowatt hour of electricity.
Just for being part of the club, connected to the network.
Just for being a member.
Yeah. All right. Now, I know you've, I don't know if am I right to call you an authority? Some people look at you as an authority for sure. I know you've taken a trip and testified before Congress or something. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I felt very honored. So this is my 18th year of being in business, and I was invited by a group called E2, which they're nonpartisan, but they try to do education to legislators on issues that are important environmentally. And I got invited to go to Washington with a group as a delegate, and my part was to talk about small business and what the recent changes to the renewable industry have done to small businesses like my own, and to make the case showing like the people that, it isn't just Michelle Knox here. I built a diagram that showed all of the different people that are affected and the jobs that are created through this one small business to make that point to legislators, and then also showed the income levels that had been happening before the changes that came to renewables in terms of sales and the number of people we've been able to help. So I went, and then there were other delegates that talked about different things. One was cybersecurity, one was data centers and how that increase is affecting the grid and the demand for electricity and creating scarcity. And so we went as a group and met with moderate Republicans to educate them about our stories. It was such an empowering experience. It was my first time of going to Washington. So I did the Capitol thing first, and then I stayed and did the tourist thing afterwards and still got to see the sites. I stayed an extra day. So very honored to have been able to be part of that group and to have went and tried to make the case for my industry and small businesses like myself. And then additionally, in the state of Illinois, I've always done policy and advocacy work and been a part of, in a larger group, of helping to see that we have good policy. We happen to have what are called renewable energy credits through a program called Illinois Shines. And that program, with the tax credit going away for residential due to the federal changes at the end of 2025, we're lucky in Illinois because we still do have an incentive program for folks that want to go solar that helps them to offset that cost. Other states don't necessarily have that. So this is one case where I'm happy to be in Illinois.
Well, the Midwest is a pretty cool place to live. Pretty close. It was a nice place to grow up. I grew up in Indiana, so I'm a Midwestern boy. But every place has its benefits and every place has its challenges, But tell us we talked a little bit about the rising cost of energy and part of what the drivers are involved with that. Tell us about that, what your thoughts are.
I alluded to it a little bit in my last statement. So data centers are becoming more prevalent across the nation, not only in Illinois, but across the nation. Data centers there are a lot of concerns, but one is energy. Water is another, noise. There's many facets, but sticking with energy, as a point of reference, there's a data center that's proposed in an area close to me in Sangamon County, the next county over, and rumblings that there's also one being proposed in Christian County, but they kind of do it behind the scenes. You don't know too much about it until the land's been acquired. So anyway, the data center that's being proposed in Sangamon County is estimated to use 600 megawatts of power. So as a point of comparison, the city of Springfield, which is our state capital, is a municipal utility, and they have their own generation asset, Dolman 4, which is a so-called clean coal-fired plant that was built in 2008. And that plant at peak produces about 200 megawatts of power, and it still does not meet the full load of the city of Springfield. So we're planning to put a data center out in the country, and it's going to require 600 megawatts. Where does that power come from?
No kidding.
So what happens is throughout our country, there are what are called regional transmission organizations, or RTOs as we refer to them. And so for Illinois, we have two. In northern Illinois, it's PJM. In southern Illinois, it's MISO. But it not only encompasses Illinois, it encompasses, like MISO will encompass states south of us up into Minnesota and Michigan, and then come down and go even as far as Houston, Texas. So no matter where the data center is built within that regional transmission organization, that's the open market. So power will be pulled from the open market. So it affects all utility customers that live within that specific RTO. And so as you can see, when we are putting a 600 megawatt in one location online, now imagine if we're doing that 30 times over. How much power, what is the demand that has come in all of a sudden, and how is that demand being met? Well, it's not. So it creates scarcity. When it creates scarcity, that drives utility prices up. And that's the reason that many of us across the country are seeing these increases in rates. And so in Illinois, in the fall session, we had proposed a bill called Bring Your Own New Clean Energy. We called it Beyonce. And we have now resurrected it to some degree in the spring session in a bill called the Power Act. But we've added an S to the end because it's bring your own new clean energy and storage. Because not only do we want to produce it, but let's think about it. Those data centers are 24/7 operating facilities.
Right.
So we need to be able to produce the energy during the day if we're using solar. We need to be able to store the extra that we produce. So we double produce during the day. We store the other amount, then we pull from that storage from the battery and we dispatch it at night to feed that 24/7 continuous load. If that's done, then what that does is it eliminates the strain to the grid, and it can actually be a benefit to the grid. And so we're trying to get at least some level of that implemented for the investor-owned utilities that are regulated in our state, and then to put some guidelines or some guardrails in the municipal and rural electric cooperative territory that do not have public oversight in the state of Illinois. They're governed by their boards in the case of the co-ops or by city councils in the case of the munis, just so that we're all kind of protecting each other. And we do that in Illinois,
Right.
but then the other states need to do it too. So really we need to be looking at this on a federal level in terms of, just providing protections and safeguards into the future. Now, the good news for somebody like me is that as electricity rates continue to go up, even without the federal tax credit that was present before, I can make the case because I'm offsetting that utility bill for those customers. And as the price goes up, I look even better.
Right. Instead of becoming a luxury or a nice thing to have, you almost become a necessity. Yeah. Now, I'd always heard that data centers use a huge amount of energy. I didn't understand to what degree that was. And you kind of went over those numbers real quick. So I want to back up.
Yeah.
You 200 megawatts for the entire city of Springfield. And that's not
Yeah.
quite meeting the need. That
Right.
data center, one data center, using 3 times that load
That's
for one
correct.
data center. So you essentially, if the present generation system was sized to meet all that demand, they'd have to quadruple their size.
Yeah, and I mean, it's exponentially growing over the next, as these data centers continue to come online. We kind of didn't get ahead of it as quickly as we did. And originally, everybody thought, and still in some areas, they think, oh, it's great economic development. It's a driver of economic development. It's going to bring tax revenues. It's going to help our schools. Okay, well, all of that may be true, but if you're hurting all of the citizens across the board, though, in terms of not being able to pay for their utility bills, then what is the benefit really? And there's been just a lot of issues that have come out, because of lessons learned from the early centers that came online. So what we're saying in Illinois is let's put some moratoriums in place in local communities until our legislature can have the time to look through things and we can get some laws passed as safeguards to our citizens. And I hope that other states are following suit, some of them, hopefully all of them, so that we don't have this national crisis occur that any worse than it already is.
Are you aware of any state or area of the country that's really doing it well, that has a good handle on this?
Well, I think there are some. I mean, I think the state of Washington, if I recall correctly, they did have some legislation that basically said Beyonce, like, you want to come on in, but you bring your own energy, that kind of thing, because we're not
Okay.
going to have you impact our citizens in a negative way. That's just one example I can think. So I think that it's really about education. And in our state, there's been like a coalition that's been formed statewide. So communities are sharing information with each other, that we're helping communities to get set up with their own little Facebook pages so that within the local communities, people have a place to go to learn more, to be advocates, to come out. I think we're going to need to see more of that. And so I think if states can work to establish statewide organizations in which there can be that sharing of information, that education of decision makers beyond just the developers coming in and showing the dollar signs, that's really what's important to making sure that this rolls right.
Yeah. Yeah. Cost benefit analysis. Like you said,
Yes.
there will be some benefits, certainly, but at what cost?
Right.
Right. Wow. You've given us a lot to think about, but boy, I appreciate your story. It's love a good American woman story from a woman's standpoint, coming from, a business standpoint, then through being an educator and a mother and then entrepreneur, and you've made it work. So
Thank you,
Very
Darren.
inspirational. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything we'd like to hit on? Did we
I,
catch everything?
I think I want to hit a little bit on, you talk about being an American and being an American woman. I want to talk a little bit about American products. I think
Yes.
that's another important part and facet of my business, and it was a decision I made in the very beginning when I formed it, that I saw renewables as an emerging market, as an opportunity for manufacturers in the United States to be able to grow and be leaders. And so I made a conscious decision to support American manufacturing. At that time, there was a lot of Chinese manufacturers, of course, producing less expensive products. And so, in order for me to be competitive, I had to be lean and mean, which is why I worked by myself for quite a long while to build the business. And I did so. And, my manufacturers, originally I was supporting Solar World out of Oregon. They'd been manufacturing modules in the United States since 1975. Unfortunately, they were not able to weather through what I call the Chinese invasion, and they went bankrupt at the end of 2018. So I then switched to Mission Solar Energy out of San Antonio, Texas. Now, what had happened is Solar World even made their own cells, so they were fully, operational, making their own product. Some of the American manufacturers that were able to continue on had to import cells to be able to remain cost effective and in the market. When the Inflation Reduction Act passed in 2022, and it helped incentivize American manufacturers to return more of the manufacturing to the United States, to use more component parts from American manufacturers. And as a result, Mission Solar Energy has again launched a cell production line. And in 2026, their modules are made with not only an American produced product, but also American cells. Same thing for Solar Edge, an Israeli company, primarily was making products in Mexico and China. The Inflation Reduction Act brought them back here, so they are now producing their inverters in Austin, Texas, and their optimizers in Seminole, Florida. And then Unirac is my racking company. They're out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've had them since 2012. So I think it's important that we recognize that the IRA did do what it was supposed to do. We were on an uptick, and then at present we're just kind of, regrouping, reorganizing due to all the changes that came about under the current administration. But I think it's important that quality products are used on installations. And in my opinion, that we're supporting American manufacturing, and the Buy American, Be American.
Absolutely. And I thank you so much for bringing me back to the reason I do this podcast. Buy American made first. No, that's the whole point of what I do. So thank you.
You're welcome.
But, I really appreciate the fact that you've consciously made those decisions and sought out vendors that are right here in the USA and support our fellow
Thank you.
countrymen. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Really enjoyed this.
And I'm glad to have it shining here in Illinois. Darren, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for doing this and for highlighting American products. I think that's so important. And I'm very honored to have been one of your original interviewees, I guess. So thank you, and good luck with your endeavors.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And I'd like to check back maybe a year down the road and see how things are still going for you. But
Please do.
in the meantime, have a great evening. It was great talking to you. And all of you out there, if you're looking for solar in the state of Illinois, windsolar.usa.com. Reach out to Michelle. She's the authority in that state, it sounds like. So you'd be in good hands.
Thanks for the plug, Darren.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too. And everyone else, regardless of what you're looking for, I just urge you to be aware of the products that are out there. And every time you can, think American made first.